Hello and welcome to the Game Dev London podcast, a community of amazing people who love to talk about and share their love of the details behind making games, whether or not they're actually based in London. I'm your host, Oscar Clark, he, him pronouns, and I'm on a quest to understand everything you wanted to know about game dev but never dared to ask. Today, I'm interested in consumer experience, player experience from a community point of view, and I'm delighted to be joined by the amazing Greg from Helpshift. Greg, how you doing? Nice to see you. Do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Oscar. My name is Greg Posner. As he mentioned, I am a sales engineer for Helpshift and Keyword Studios. So I work with our prospects, our customers, and everyone who's involved about how we can help in the gaming industry, specifically around customer support, customer experience, and making sure that the player has a great experience in games. I've been doing this for the past 10 to 15 years in my life, not just in gaming, across different verticals. And then I've grown to just love the experience and making sure that players feel like they're immersed in this experience through the whole time. And whether it's helping your community through a stuck level on a game, or right now helping your community through potential layoffs and how you can help others in the industry get back to where they want to go. It's just such a great experience. It's just a great honor to help individuals and be a part of this. And on the side, they enable me to also have my own podcast and my own kind of player experience. It's called Player Engage, and we also get to talk to people. But I'm really excited to be able to talk to you, Oscar, because I think this is a great conversation topic.
Exactly, and we met a couple of times, particularly around the. For those of you who don't know, that Helpshift and Keywords had an event at GDC, and they then repeated it at Gamescom, where we basically had a whole bunch of community folks. And what really excites me about that, and why I think it's good to sort of keep talking, is that they were you guys were very keen on making sure that you created a complete blank canvas for people who are in the business of helping players have better times just talk to each other. And I think that's really a key part. I think what that indicates to me is something really fundamental about this whole process, which is we want players to have a good time, and you've got to empower people to be able to make sure that works. I mean, so tell us a little bit about the podcast and what you talk about in that.
So on the podcast, the Player Engage podcast, we talk with. It originally started off with people in customer service and customer support, and how you build a game around the customer experience, right? Because everyone thinks that when it's time for customer support, you just put up an FAQ and call it a day, or a menu. And sometimes when you're a player in a game, you want that help right away, or you want a better experience. Imagine playing a World of Warcraft type of game, and when you go into support, it calls you by the character that you are rather than your user handle, right? It's about the experience. And we started talking to different people in gaming who work on that player experience side to understand how they build those systems out, what goes into their mindset, how does localization work, right? If you're trying to build a global game. And as we started talking to more and more people, I'm also really interested in people's backgrounds, right? What did they want to do when they grew up? Because I know I always wanted to be in gaming, but I didn't know how to code. So I figured, hey, I'm not going to be able to get into gaming. And then you realize, hey, there's a whole world out there that you can still help yourself with. But as we start talking to more people in the player experience from the customer side, or they're all customer side, but from the support side, right? I started talking to different game designers, game developers, sound people, design, just everything. And it's an awesome spider web, for lack of better words, of how games are created, and learning about this whole experience and the types of backgrounds you need to get in is something that I love to share with people, because I was in fintech and I loved my job, but it's not always fun working in other industries, especially when you're getting yelled at by stock traders because something's not working. So then all of a sudden I found the gaming industry, and everyone was so welcoming, and it was just such a great experience to be able to come in here. So being able to share best practices and why we are in this industry to help each other out. And I think that's, again, that's something that's fun to share and talk to people about.
No, exactly. And I think what you kind of hinted at, that I think if you look at what you've described, I think essentially there are layers. There are so many layers to managing good player experiences. So obviously we've got the base game, but once we get past the base game, yes, you've got an FAQ. What does an FAQ do? What questions do you put on an FAQ? How do you know that questions frequently asked before you've released the game? How do you keep track? Where are you looking at? Where people are talking? Are they talking in your social channels? Are they talking on Discord? How do they report issues? Do you have an email? Do you have, some ticket system that tracks? I mean, we can talk about the the X platform, as in the X social network, as I like to call it. But sorry, it's a stupid sort of pun, but in my head, it kind of weirdly is self-defining. But there are lots of different ways and means and Reddits of this world. So, I mean, obviously, this is about us understanding how do people approach things. I mean, yes, we know there are tools, and you guys have a bunch of tools, but I want to get to sort of the bottom of the kind of fundamentals. What are the key things you think that somebody who knows how to make a game but doesn't know how to manage the community of that game from the point of view of problem management? Let's focus on problem management.
Yeah.
What do you think the things that they really need to think about?
The thing we really like to talk a lot about, particularly me, I love to talk about feedback. There's a
Mm,
lot of companies out there that are building games, and people are really good at building games, and they're building their dream project. But sometimes the dream project may not essentially align to what players want, and that's
mm,
fine, right? It's important to understand what your audience wants to play, right? You're not always right, and you could still build your vision, right? But it's essential to start collecting feedback, whether you're an indie, whether you're a AAA studio building the next FIFA, right? Like, you want to hear from people. And sometimes when you are a smaller studio, you don't have a large customer service team to be able to help you with that stuff, or that player experience team. So it's easy to get started these days because there's so many networks where people are talking. And my favorite one recently is Discord, right? I mean, every gamer at this point is aware of Discord, right? And it became this beast of a platform, from just a voice chat for games to now different studios launching their own Discords to hear feedback, right? And do collect that feedback. Yes, it might be annoying to look at 100 emails because you got 100 emails, but that's 100 people that took the time to say, I love your game, but I'd rather do this. Or maybe they're just saying some bad stuff to you because they're jerks. But like,
but also, just to interrupt on that one, for everyone who's going to be posting, who's going to bother posting an email to you, there's probably 20, sometimes 30 other people who might have done. We found this out. I used to work in all sorts of things a long time ago before I got into games, and I got into games a long time ago. That if you look in consumer products, for every complaint a company gets, you're talking about 20 to 30 people who would have complained if they could have been bothered.
yeah.
Sorry, I felt that really reinforces your point about this is someone who's bothered.
Yeah, 100%, right? A lot of people are shy and they don't want to reach out to you, or they don't want to take the time, right? But if you give them a platform and a voice to be able to do that, it's important. And this could be another topic we talk about at some point, but we're also talking about taking a deeper look into kind of the VIP platforms these days, right? Because a lot of studios are trying to say, hey, how do we work with our VIPs? And the idea is, what are your VIPs playing in your game, right? Do they like this new tournament that you launched? Or maybe they're not going into that tournament and you want to figure out why. And engaging with players that are involved in your game and say, hey, Oscar, we see that you didn't really play these new tournaments. Can you tell me why? And you can say, you know what? I love the idea of it, but it was just an inconvenient time or inconvenient places, right? And these things that you can think
Or I
about
forgot.
instead of, or you forgot, right? Like, when you start talking to your audience or your players, right, your community, you're going to get this type of feedback. And maybe you did have the best vision of your game and people love it, right? But a lot of times they're going to say, hey, I recommend you do this, or you know what, in this merge game, I don't like this mechanic, it's getting annoying and I'm going to stop playing the game, right? Like, you need to be able to hear this stuff. You can't turn a blind eye to it, because then you're just going to create a game for yourself, which could be fine too, but you want your game to grow and scale, and working with the community, and Discord is that channel. Slack
Yeah.
as well is a great channel as well, to just start collecting that feedback.
I know a lot of people get worried about the feedback bit because there's kind of an assumption a lot of devs have, which is if the player said it must be true. But the problem I have with that is the boat face problem. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase. Basically, it was a crowdsourced name and it got voted by everybody. And the way they set the rules up for the competition, they kind of had to suck it up. And I mean, in some ways, it's become iconic in itself. But if you're not careful how you frame the questions, if you don't make it clear to players that you're listening, but that doesn't mean you're going to take their direct advice. The reality is that a player knows how to play. They don't necessarily understand why, from a point of view of everybody, not just them as an individual, there's actually a whole range of strategic decisions that a designer has to make that might not necessarily meet that. So we have to kind of reserve. I think we have to hold back saying we want to hear, but we have our expertise too, and recognize the balance between the player need, which we absolutely need to listen to, and the business need, which is sometimes not always the same. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I think visibility for players on what goes into making that type of change, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Starfield is a great example of this right now, and it's I do like Starfield, right? But you can see the community is upset with Starfield, and they're saying, "What's taking so long with these patches? Why are there no updates yet? Where are the modding tools?" And like, guys, these games are huge, right? It's not like you could send feedback saying, I don't like this mechanic. Is it fixed yet? Like, it takes time, whether, again, you're a small studio or a big studio. And yes, smaller studios will be more agile, so maybe they can do things a little quicker, but like, these things don't change quickly. So I think by people understanding what goes into making this video game, so when I send this complaint, like, what's the actual feedback? And I have a lot of respect for a lot of these gaming companies that put like public facing roadmaps on their
Yeah.
website. I think it's really cool. I think it's really awesome. I think it's also really scary because you're potentially setting yourself up for do you guys do that?
Well, I've done it in many forms. There's a couple of games we're currently doing on. There's a game called Coney Island, which we're working where we have a roadmap. We're going to have to slightly change some of it for other reasons. But as long as we're hoping that as long as we're upfront and communicate that, that's going to work fine. But we did at one point on PlayStation, I think it was the US team, when I was doing PlayStation Home back in like 2010-ish, we actually had a system where you could make a request and then players could vote which was the higher priority for them.
Yeah.
We were careful. We didn't say that we would absolutely do it. And we could, not edit because that implies too much of an influence, but we could
Sure.
kind of like put our thumb on the scale a little bit, overtly. It wasn't hidden, which meant that we could say, okay, we take a note, we understand that this is what we're going to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes what we're going to do about it wouldn't be a direct piece, but that managed it. That helped us manage the process. We were able to be open. We were able to understand. But one of the snags I found with that process is that a lot of the really important things to change would never get picked up by the player. Things that would have a kind of profound impact on the principle of the game would never get picked up by the players. But at the same time, these moments that you would get these comments when suddenly it'd be like being whacked in the head, where you kind of realize that's what I've been missing. That's the point I've been missing in the design. And so, I think it is a dangerously difficult place, but really valuable, incredibly valuable. And you kind of have to feel the fear and do it anyway, I suspect.
I think you made a really great point there. And my first job was at Haagen-Dazs, and my boss told me this right away. I love ice cream, right? Who doesn't? But told me the customer is not always right. That's just the case, right? The customer is not. And same thing goes with your community. And you said this, right? It's important to hear the community's feedback, but make sure you know your vision for your game, right? Your
Yes.
players who are playing your game don't know what that next level is going to look like. They don't know what that first DLC is going to be. They don't know that. And they might come in and say, hey, this worked for Roblox. Why won't it work for you guys? We're a completely different type of game, right? If I wanted to copy and clone one game, I would do that. But like, it's important to hear the voices of your players and see where their struggles are, but make sure you keep a vision for your game because they should not control that. That is your baby. That is your passion project.
And if I sound like I'm dismissing a player, I'm genuinely not. The point is that any product owner, I mean, that's been my main role as a sort of product owner, but any designer, product owner, whatever the role is, has to understand that the experience that's being expressed is how that player actually felt.
Yep.
And if we belittle that, if we don't accept that that is their truth, we're not going to really understand what's going on for them in the game. And actually, what a lot of the things I found really interesting is trying to translate how that truth happened for them. And a lot of that can often be little things like there's some situations where I've worked out that people were struggling. In fact, like one of the current games we had a whole bunch of problems, but people who followed through the UX as intended, so basically they followed the onboarding path, didn't have a problem. People who went off the tracks didn't understand what to do, and that's a fairly common problem. But it's how do you find that balance? And it's sudden realization. The reason why this person is having this experience and is shouting is not because they don't like the game. It's because they didn't pick up the signals earlier. So what's the answer? Is it to change the game, or is it to change the signals?
Yeah, right. I mean, we talked about that. I think I spoke to a company called Everguild about that. Right. It was,
Mm,
how long do you make your intro tutorial? A lot of people
mm,
don't like it, right? And if it's too long, they're going to quit right away. But if it's too short, they're going to be lost. And it's
yeah.
this delicate kind of balancing act. And one thing we do at Helpshift, I'll put my sales hat on for a minute, and I apologize, is like, we segment your feedback by your player groups, right?
Mm,
So your high value players, people that spend money in app, if they're providing feedback, that might be a little more valuable feedback than maybe myself, who's never played your game before, but I'm going to come in and say that. And every
yeah.
voice is important, but I think certain voices might hold a little more weight based on their feedback because of that experience. If someone's played
Mm,
your game for 100 hours and says, I really don't like the position of this button, or I don't like what the right control stick does, right? That's going to be more valuable than Oscar, who just booted the game for the first time and says, your intro is too long, right?
yeah.
And
Your
both are
intro
valid
sucks.
feedbacks. It's just, how do you
Yeah.
weigh it? And when you send it to your product team, right? Your product team's going to probably add a whole bunch of stuff, and they don't want to, like you said earlier, you don't want to kind of completely dismantle your roadmap, but you want to make sure you find time to address those issues that are affecting your core players.
And so I think kind of the idea of listening to players I think really important, but I think also comparing what players say they did versus what they actually did is also important. So I think I always find gameplay data massively important in understanding what's going on. It's not always clear if you haven't already set back and designed your game to post the right kind of information. But again, that's probably for another time. But one of the key things I try and get people to do is to think about how you can track player behavior
Uh-huh.
so that when they complain about something, I can actually understand if is there a pattern here? Is that thing they described happening to everybody? Oh, that's what's going wrong. Now I can see where it is in the game.
You're getting into a world where I'm just dumbfounded, for lack of better words, right? Recently, Sony put out a patent for variable difficulty in games, right? Which I remember from my Dreamcast days, right? Like I was
Yeah,
playing NFL 2K, and the defense would
yeah,
get stronger if I was doing good. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, there's so many of these mechanics that are getting copyrighted and
yeah.
trademarked and stuff like this that, like, is it gonna worry people from taking chances because they're gonna be stepping on someone? Is it it's a
What worries
weird
me
world when
most
it comes
about
to
those things is these attempts to litigate often end up trying to litigate things which already have precedent. I was used as an expert witness in a case on the use of art in some hyper casual games in France, where a particular French company was suing another French company over the use of assets weren't even theirs. Well, they were kind of off the shelf, kind of like freebie assets, and the way and they were saying, "Oh, you're copying." No precedent. It was. It's anyway. I don't want to get into the whys and wherefores because I don't believe cloning is a good thing, and not that any of these were cloning. And in fact, that was kind of my point: is that you can't take into account a single mechanic. You've got to think about the whole player experience,
there's a whole
and
picture
this
here, yeah.
litigation processes worries me. But anyway, that's not why we're here. We're talking about players. So obviously, we're capturing this information from the player. Um, how about responding? I mean, obviously, small games, large games, the volume of audience is going to be a critical factor of how quickly we can respond and what resources we can tap into to respond. I mean, obviously, we can do the one-to-one stuff, but and again, I don't want to get into the sales hat bit too much, but I think it's interesting for those people who don't know what big platforms do. What can they learn from and the way the tools that yourselves pull together? Because I'm thinking, so for example, I know about stuff like you've been pulling in kind of AI type response systems to allow people to get basically to filter responses quickly, which makes a
Hmm.
lot of sense. How what are those tools? What are those kind of categories of tools do you think that um, games developers can benefit from? Again, not from the perspective of sales, but from the perspective of what they do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, again, with a community type of tool, you still want to probably have a Discord channel these days. You probably want to have Slack, right? You want to be able to
Yeah,
communicate with them. I would recommend a customer support tool. Obviously, I'm going to say you should use Helpshift because we're in-app and we're in-game, but players don't want to type emails out anymore. And a lot of these companies think, hey, I'm just going to put an email here. And if they want to type something out, emails, I mean, I'm in my late 30s right now. I don't want to type an email. I don't want to read an email anymore. Like emails are going in the way of voicemail in my mind. It's just like, oh man, I got another email.
Yeah.
I'd rather have a message or a chat sent to me where I can quickly see it and tag it and organize it and to send someone. It doesn't need to be Helpshift, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of tools you can take a look at there that can get you started for little
Other services
capital.
do apply.
Yeah, right. But
Yeah.
and then from there, it's just making sure that you're sending those inquiries to the right part, right? Because a lot of times, I was a customer support agent. I would get a message to me saying, "I don't really like this in your game. I can't do anything about that. So why am I getting this ticket, right?" So I send it to where I need to. But I think I'd like to talk about bots because bots have a bad sentiment in there. I think people don't. Yeah, rap is the word I'm looking for there. But I think it's by poor design, and that's really my choice. Because if I think about myself as a player, if I'm leaving feedback, I don't need to talk to you, Oscar, right? I just want to get quickly to answer the questions.
I don't want to talk to a person,
right? Like, and same like it's funny. We talked to a lot of these companies about implementing VIP strategies, and they're like, all my VIPs need to talk to an agent. I don't care what it is. And it's like, okay, well, what happens if you just need to reset your password or you need to restore your account? Why am I going to wait 5 to 10 minutes to talk to an agent when I could just talk to a bot and get it done? There's definitely a reason to keep agents. This isn't about replacing anyone or doing anything. It's about, but it's about convenience for the player, right? Again, like resetting passwords. Let's do it quickly. No need to talk to anyone. If I'm having trouble playing the game, I want to be able to talk to someone. So I would suggest some sort of tool for anyone who's building out an experience or a community, a way to proactively reach out to players, whether that's a tool with Helpshift or maybe it's a tool like OneSignal where you can push these notifications, as well as a way to kind of, when you collect that feedback, to aggregate it, whether it be a Helpshift, sorry, I keep saying that, or if you want to use a Jira, if you want to use a Trello, if you want to use
I'm thinking about things like Zoho or
CRM,
Zenset, these kind of tools which allow us to sort of capture, track, and progress and know who's responsible at the time for that action. But I think you actually raise a slightly different point, particularly when you're talking about bots. I think it's a really interesting one because if you know it's a bot, the bot can let you cut through to the thing you want to do. But the reason I want to talk to an agent, is when the bot isn't smart enough to understand how to get me to solve the thing I need to solve now. And quite often that's because I don't know the language that you've used to define that process. And your language for using it might be different from some other games. And I think that's the point where I have to resort to talking to a human, because a human can parse that process, that process I'm trying to solve much more quickly than maybe a bot can, because a bot's typically going to have fairly dumb processes. But that's why I'm interested. That's why I found the whole AI use in bots really interesting. Live chat with a ChatGPT style model, allowing you to get to the point of what you're trying to solve quicker, to me sounds really interesting. And actually could even be potentially faster than a player than an agent. Is that fair?
That's fair to a degree. We like to say that we keep our bots on rails. It's not conversational AI. And that's by design right now, because and a lot of the studios we work with are also kind of wary about the types of answers that these bots are going to give if they're unsupervised, right? So there's stories online, you can look them up, where bots say silly things. I think there was one here in the States where someone negotiated a car price with a bot down to like $10 for this big giant SUV, and like they realized it was a bot and they kind of manipulated it, and that is going to happen for the next who knows how many years, right? Because we're in these early.
Someone try to use a bot as a lawyer in one case. I believe really interesting. They basically used AI to provide their legal argument, and it turned out the AI invented the case, the precedent, and they didn't check it.
You always got to check your work with AI. But you know what? First of all, that's ridiculous. But I respect someone trying to say, hey, I'm going to do something crazy here. And you deserve to flop on your face for that specific cause. Like, that's probably not the best one. But like, it would still worry me if I was a AAA studio to say, hey, my customer support agents are going to start responding via that. Recommending things, yeah, like, hey, Oscar, here's maybe what you should say based on what Greg's issue is. And our tool collects metadata about the player, right? So we understand who you are, we understand what you're doing, and you can almost become more personalized, which I think is awesome and I think is exciting. And I think within the next year we'll probably get a lot closer there. It's just I personally wouldn't want to take a risk yet and try that stuff, but I definitely think we're on the right way for it.
And I think that taps into something I think is also important to any developer, whether they're using platforms or doing it themselves. The authenticity of the response matters.
Yeah.
So whilst these other things can be really useful, if we lose track of the authenticity of the response, and it's much easier to show that authenticity through a person, through an agent, I think that's where we lose the connection with the player. At the end of the day, if we want trust, that's only built through authenticity. But equally, if your person who's doing that reaction doesn't have to their hands the answers, they won't come across as competent, and therefore they won't feel as authentic, even if that wasn't their personal problem. It was just the fact that the question was out there. Because the player doesn't know that. The player, for them, that question is completely irrelevant, whether or not they understand the context of the game. Does that make sense?
It does, and in a similar context, I was talking to a designer the other day, and they were testing kind of level building with AI, and they said it's good, but it misses that human touch, and I think players can pick up on that really quicker than we think. Most people would think we can. Like when you're playing a level and you see the same textures repeated over and over, and I mean, you hear about that in some games we're using things over and over again, right? Like it misses that human element, that human touch. There's something about it at the end of the day when you get an agent to respond to you, it's an agent. It's like, all right. I mean, it goes back to even like snail mail, right? If someone takes the time to write you a letter and it's just like, wow, I got a real letter here. You get excited about reading it. It's that human element that no matter what you do, you can't really replace that. And I think players will notice it. And I think as more people start testing things with AI, they're going to start to notice that AI is really good at a lot of this stuff. But when you need that human touch, especially in artwork and design and music, right? Like you get called out pretty quick when AI gets involved there.
And I think that kind of applies to any tool. It's like all tools have their limits. I mean, I think we've got an uncanny valley in the kind of AI world that we haven't really kind of understood yet, which is that it can do so much things, but the hallucinations or whatever language you want to use to describe those misfires are a problem, are a reality, and how we fact check these things is going to be really complicated. So having this idea of on rails bots that have some parameters to work within, and they got selections of responses that we can respond with, that's going to help make life easier, whether that's on the agent side, the sort of not scripts, but the mechanics that they have available to them, or whether it's on a kind of direct interaction, live chat type interaction. And I think what's interesting to me is, even if you're an indie, thinking about your structure of how you feed back to players whilst you're preparing to release that game before you get it out is going to save you so much pain. Where are the password type issues? I mean, there won't always be passwords, but where's the setup issues, where's the loading issues, where's the even stupid little things like every once in a while Android Google Play decides to stuff up and you have to clear the cache, otherwise it'll be stuck in pending forever. That's not your fault, but if you don't have that written down somewhere, if somebody says the thing won't install, you've got no basis to know how to respond. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, and this is where I think AI can maybe start to play a role. Is if Oscar complained about this happening in the Play Store and Greg complained about this in the Play Store, maybe Google could start to be a little more proactive with AI and say, hey, we saw a bunch of users with similar issues like this. So even before Greg reaches out to support, maybe we'll put the little 3 stars. I think that's the Bard icon on the bottom, saying, hey, click here. We think you might be running into an issue. And I think AIs can be doing a great job at proactively looking at this stuff and saying, hey, based on logs, based on all this, we should reach out to this user. And I think that will be the exciting parts. Yeah, it's not your fault, but if we can get in front of you before you even have to reach out to us, and who's going to be better at catching signals than someone like a computer that can do it instantly, right? I think that's where
and at volume. To my mind, that's the biggest thing here, is because if you've got thousands of players, tens of thousands of players, millions of players, the percentage likelihood of that activity happening and then giving a signal to machine learning to understand that this is an issue, That's going to be so much more useful. And if you can feed that information back into the development, we can start working out patterns that are happening for those. Because, yes, of course, every game that's launched should be bug free, but it never is. And sometimes it's not a bug, it's a usability issue.
Yep.
But equally, how do you know the usability issues unless people are reporting it? And anyway, I find all that stuff fascinating. So it's not, to me, like you said, getting feedback matters. But I don't think it ends at getting feedback. I think it's getting the feedback, how you respond to it, but also how you use that information to kind of further the development of the game. I think that's an intrinsic part. Maybe we don't talk about as much about why problem management is so useful, because of how much impact it can have on the lifetime, the longevity of the game, the further development of the game. Does that make sense
Are
to
we
you as
allowed
well?
to talk about games in not so positive lights, or do you not want to do that?
We can. I won't hold you to it. I mean, you can give them aliases if you prefer. I mean, you mentioned Starfield. I am a massive fan of Starfield. I really
I'm a
enjoyed it.
fan of
I'm
Starfield.
so
So
disappointed. Yeah.
But so Payday 3, a game I was
Yeah.
very excited to play. Like me and my group of friends were like, all right, we're gonna do this. And when the game launched on day one, it was free on Game Pass. Beautiful. It was a nightmare to log in. It was a nightmare to create an account. They almost made it as difficult as possible to get started. And I went to the website to try and find support. I tried to do everything and it just was non-existent. And it was just so
Yeah.
frustrating because we wanted to play that game and we were so excited about it. And other than, I mean, they're big on Twitter and I'm not a Twitter X user, right? But like, I'm not gonna go on those platforms and complain about it in public. Like I can, but I mean, they probably already do that. But like, this is my first experience in playing this game, and it's terrible. And you know what? I gave it a couple days, I gave it a couple weeks, and they didn't communicate back. And even if it's like, hey, Greg, we got this, we're gonna take a look at it, right? Like, communication is so key. Even if you can't fix the issue, it's when you start leaving your community to hang it and dry and act like they're not heard. It's just like, you know what, this game's not going to be worth my time. Like, I was excited about it, but it goes back to the Eminem song, you get one chance, one opportunity, right? It's like, I
Yeah.
was willing to give it a little more. It's just, silence is deafening. And it was just like, come on, guys. And this is part of the game experience. Everyone thinks, you know what? It's when you put your heist mask on. It's when you're going to play the game. No, me getting set up, me trying to log into the game. This is all core game experience to me. But you know what? Most people don't think about that because they're just like, oh, they're just going to log in and start playing the game.
I have this particular bugbear, and maybe it's because I'm a bit ADHD and kind of like I find it problematic. For example, I think it was was it Watchmen, but definitely Final Fantasy 14 when it first came out. The fact that I spent 20 minutes pressing X. No timing, no kind of decision making. Next thing, wait for what? Oh, what was it? Massive racing game on PlayStation. Anyway,
Gran Turismo.
Gran Turismo, where you're forced to watch their documentary on the history of Gran Turismo, whether you want to or not, before you can even play the game.
They know you wanted to. Don't worry.
It's that sort of early moments that really frustrate me. Oh, don't get me wrong. I mean, I've been on the side of the fence where we had a game recently where at launch there were changes to the matchmaking, which because of the backend platform we were using, which then broke, and the whole game is affected by it. We got to it, we fixed it. Within a week, everything was all the issues that were being resolved, but it sucks the life out of the market. And now we've got the long slog to try and build up that trust again. So it is a profoundly affecting problem if you don't understand or pay attention early on. Anyway, so like you say, this is. I don't remember playing Payday 3 at that stage. I don't remember having issues logging in. But yeah, I've been similar.
They actually just announced yesterday they're doing a user forum, like a user voting platform now to allow people to. So this goes back to where you're going, and I think that's great, right? Good. You maybe a little too late, and maybe it's learnings for next time, right? But like, hey, let's learn from this experience and go from there. Everyone's going to make a mistake, and it's perfectly fair. It's what you do with it and how you deal with it. And if I could just plug here, we run a group called Community Clubhouse at Keywords Helpshift. It's a whole bunch of studios, and it's not a sales platform, so I'd say check it out. But it's really just knowledge sharing. There's companies like Niantic in there, Sega in there, and all these huge corporations or studios that just come to share best practices, whether it's around trust and safety, whether it's around community, whether it's about how you do all this stuff. And I think it's just fascinating to hear how these different, both AAA studios and AA and single A studios, they all do things in similar fashion, but some of them do these neat tips and tricks to make life easier. And again, not about Helpshift, not about keywords. It's just best practices in there. And there's a lot of content online about it. It's just a really great group. And I personally learned a lot in there. And it's just a cool way to kind of learn more about what's happening in the industry. Because again, studios do these right things and some studios do the wrong things, and they can collaborate about them.
And I mean, obviously, because I was hosting the events, it was absolutely amazing how, like you say, folks from Niantic, folks from I think we have some Supercell folks. I remember, I think we had Neil from Jagex happened to be in the room at the time, and his mate man, I went, Neil, what about this? And I got him to respond in the process. And when you have an audience of people who have been there, done that, they've got the wounds, they've got the injuries, they've got the success stories, they understand the reality of managing communities at scale. We were able to talk about the great things, the hard things, crazy things like where for example at PlayStation we had death threats over PlayStation Home. You have to look after your team in these experiences. These are not consumer facing things, but understanding it's not just about making sure we create great, safe, welcoming communities, but we also have to make sure our teams are safe and looked after. And I think that the community clubhouse in particular gave us a great space to share those war stories, to share those experiences, and to understand, oh, hang on, that's an interesting way to approach this. And everybody was so open, so willing to talk about it. I mean, yeah, I could bore forever. But there were so many people. Where we were actually, I think I was talking to Kristen, who was at Microsoft. She's like massive, expert in live ops games, runs a live ops podcast as well. And she and I were just chatting on stage, just sharing these kind of moments that we'd experienced running these massive games and the problems that you face. And what was interesting is the other people in the room who were maybe from smaller studios or bigger studios, we all had that common understanding that it's about making sure players are safe, that they're heard, that you're authentic in the way you respond to them, that you don't just ignore what they've said, you act upon what they say. But anyway, so yeah, I love that too. That was a really enjoyable thing last year.
Yeah, we're at the end of the day, we're all gamers too, for the most part, right? So we're all just sharing knowledge to help each other out. Trust and safety is one of my favorite topics right now, along with accessibility, because it's getting games into the hands of more people. More people can play. There's no reason we should stop someone from playing a game if they have a problem with an accessibility or disability or because of their gender, right? Everyone should be like, anyone that wants to make the gaming industry a better place should be welcome to come in and help it, because at the end of the day, we all win by getting better games, and who could be against that?
Absolutely, and it is tough times at the moment in the industry. I mean, it is the toughest time I've ever seen. But at the end of the day, those people I know are still wanting to make games despite that, because this is what we are. We try to create this form of communication. I think that's what a game is, whether it's a single player game or not. You might be a narrative arc, there might be a number of things, but at the end of the day, it's a form of expression that is unique in itself, that it's a verb, we do. And there are very few ways of experiencing the world differently that games, in ways that games can deliver.
Yeah.
So, with kind of like this in mind, I mean, what's the sort of, if you were looking at an indie studio or maybe someone slightly larger, what are the kind of like 3 key things that they need to find ways to solve when it comes to that consumer experience?
Oh, that is a loaded question. First, again, communication, right? Any communication channel, have an open and easy to use communication channel. I wouldn't recommend email. Email is slow, right? But having a way to communicate with your gamers, I think is going to be the most important part because you're trying to build something you want. I am a fan personally of immersion in the player experience. So again, if you know I'm an orc and that's my character choice, right? Maybe you kind of bend some of the menu system and some of the options around that type of thing, right? If I'm any type of player data you can look at, I think is an interesting way. That gets a little tougher, and I understand that, but I think it's a cool way to kind of immerse your players into the game itself. And for a third one is, again, I'm going to keep saying feedback, but like you're building a game for your players to play. And if you're not talking and communicating and providing that feedback or getting that feedback from them, right? I think you're doing yourself a huge disservice. And to what you said earlier, right, about maybe publishing a roadmap or here's what we want to accomplish in the next 3, 6, 9 months, right? And providing that to your players. I think the more you're open with them, the more your players are going to give you some leeway when things happen, right? Like it's just, again, I hate saying communication, but communication is really key. I'm just keeping everyone
So it's
involved.
communication.
Yeah, sorry. It's
No, it's good. It's good. I get it.
it's
I mean,
funny. It's like I try to think about how does customer service really affect the player experience, and it's a tough question to answer because I mean, at the end of the day, it's a support portal. But I think if you could communicate with your users, if you could keep it in kind of the tone of the game, right? Like I think as long as it doesn't feel like a completely forgotten child on the other side, like I think that's what you need to do. And yeah.
And I hate to say it, but it is a oftenly unsung hero in the game development space. I mean, that's probably a little bit kind of trite in the way I'm saying it, but I genuinely think that we often think and plan for the best of the game. We don't often think enough about the ongoing support. And I think a lot of people will think if they're making, say, a product, say, a one-off kind of like experience, they'll often think this stuff doesn't apply to them. I think it does, and the reason I do is because if you're a studio that makes what they call premium, I don't like the phrase, I prefer pay up front, but these packaged goods versions of games, you're typically not just going to make one. It's not just fire, forget, and you're never going to make another game. For you to be able to make the next game, you want to have an audience that thought the thing that you did was good. If you're not addressing their customer service needs, why would they want your next game?
Yeah.
So for me, whether it's live ops as an ongoing experience for that game, or whether it's about keeping people connected to you as a studio, I think the consumer service part of it, customer service part of it, is just as important. Does that make? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and there's platforms out there that we use for we call them CRMs, but these are more gaming focused CRMs to see like you can be proactive about this stuff. If Oscar hasn't logged into your game for a few days, maybe you send them a message saying, "What's up, Oscar? I see you haven't logged in," or things like that, right? It's there's tools to be able to monitor these metrics to see what's happening. If there's a drastic change in average spend, average time in the game, average retention, right? It costs a lot of money to acquire a new gamer and to keep them online. So like you want to make sure that you don't have people leaving the game and not coming back. So having tools along with that to make sure you can monitor those metrics and see what's happening is important. I mean, it goes along with communication again, but again, being able to see these metrics early on. And if you're a small indie studio, right, you wear so many hats and you don't want to, but why not make it easier with these tools that exist out there to capture it, to post it, to understand what's happening? And again, sometimes a developer needs to be a sales rep and reach out to their player base and say, hey, why aren't you playing the game? What can I do? How can I do this? What can I, and maybe they don't want to talk to people, but if you're that passionate about the game that you're building, you have to find a way to will yourself to do it.
And a lot of game devs are a little shy about being salespeople, and I think the trouble is that you have to be to a certain extent, and you shouldn't be afraid of it because you're making an experience that you want people to be passionate about. And whilst I don't like the term salesman, I'm not a salesman. I am somebody who wants to build relationships with people. I do want people to get excited about what we do. I'm proud of the work that we do, and I want to make things. I want to make things that I'm proud of as well. And telling people doesn't have to be sleazy. It doesn't have to be a begging exercise. You can just say, look, this is the cool shit we've done. Sorry, it's cool stuff we've done. And why don't you go get it? And, we think it's valuable because of X. I think these are perfectly normal human things to be able to share. And we shouldn't be worried about it. And again, maybe coming back to this principle of authenticity. It's like, be yourself, be real.
The human touch goes a long way, and I will advocate for bots as long as I can, as long as I need to. But they both serve very important purposes in the industry, right? And I think
Yeah.
it's important to utilize both, because you do need the human element, but sometimes you need that automation as well. I don't want to talk to you, and you don't want to talk to me when it comes to resetting a password or fixing an account
Yeah.
issue. If it can be fixed
Yeah.
instantly, perfect. We don't have to communicate, and everyone's happy.
Everyone's not cheesy. And at the end of the day, to be able to efficiently handle everybody without going bankrupt, if you haven't thought about the balance between that, you're crazy. You're just crazy.
Yeah, and it's funny when we got acquired by Keywords. Looking into the different community managers that we have and how they work with community and trust and safety. It's just like so cool to think. First of all, I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and to know like that there's people in the background that are protecting my kids when they start playing these games. Like if something's to happen, is a breath of fresh air to understand that. Like, and being in the industry, you think, hey, why didn't you know that? Like, there's a lot of things you don't know when you start, and
Yeah.
until you start learning more about how it works, you start to understand how kind of the sausage is made. And just
Yeah.
seeing how community managers help people on Discord or Reddit, and how this is all managed, is just kind of like a wow, this is like a crazy industry.
And it's so important because we're dealing with entertainment. We want people to feel safe. We want to feel them to feel engaged, listened to, and that the experience is meaningful. I mean, to my mind, I think games got dismissed for its early decades as a kind of like trivial thing. I think the up to the pandemic period, at least, we suddenly had this realization that games was actually a cultural vehicle, and I think long may that continue.
Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up, everyone was talking about GTA 3 and how that was violent and how violence is in games now. And we've kind of went off the violence in games to bullying, to racism, to all
Yeah,
this crazy stuff in gaming, right? And the more people we can have on there protecting, like, just makes a better, again, community for everyone, right? No one wants
yeah.
to feel alienated. Everyone wants to be able to just play games and have fun.
It's all about keeping people safe, and that at the end of the day, I think is really kind of what it's about. It's people keeping safe and being able to have great experiences online, regardless. On that note, Greg, thank you so much. Do you want to tell people a little bit about how they can find your podcast and how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Oscar. This was a blast. I feel honored and privileged to be on here. So thank you. I'd say check
I'll give
out
it a blast.
playerengage.com. We're on all podcast platforms. So after you're done listening to Oscars, you can come check ours out. You can also go to Keyword Studios, helpshift.com. Check them out as well. We link to them all together. But then you can find me on LinkedIn, Greg Posner.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So, this has been your Game Dev London podcast. I've been your host. Greg has been a fantastic guest. And if you want to check us out, obviously do the like, subscribe, and don't forget that we've got the Discord channel. Hey, we talked about Discord a lot, and you can continue the conversation there. So, if you enjoy this, please go and do all the usual like, subscribes, and all that kind of stuff. And on that note, thank you very much. And this has been your Game Dev London podcast.